Um, on a higher level, the higher part of Todd Colby, where the energy that I have inside is definitely a positive thing. As much as I try to be dark and as much as I maybe daydream and fantasize about just how horrible things are, there's also a part of me that it's a will. I don't know what it is, but it drives me through the world and it keeps me uh, paying attention. It keeps me notating what's happening around me, watching other people, listening to things, looking at my dog, just like ways of just being in the world, which aren't like grandiose, but it's just the dailiness of paying attention. And I feel like that kind of necessitates a certain amount of, or betrays or shows a certain amount of optimism to be present. Because when you're really in despair, it's hard to be present. You just want to be inverted and whatnot. It's a way of a poetic practice, an artistic practice. And it's just amazing how much unfolds and how much there is to be interested in, how contrasting it is to everything that's happening in the world and a little bit of a relief from it. Not an escape, but a celebration of the same world that all the bad things are happening in too is also a way of paying attention and seeing sort of the remarkable structure and beauty and completeness of it all. I think I just want people to feel the complexity and the joy and feel the the connection to other people and the world and how many ways there are to sort of illustrate that, and maybe they'd want to participate in that as well because everybody has a story and a point of view and a way of seeing and being, and if you can kind of help push somebody by bravely going to the front lines and doing that, come on, the water's great.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of To Hum is Human, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of tuning into our intuition to express our passionate purpose. I'm your host, Donnabelle, and I'm so happy you're here. In this conversation, Imagery in Motion, Todd Colby on art and poetry, will explore the dance between image and language, the ghosts that linger in our creative work, and how poetry and art can open portals into new ways of being and seeing. I'm excited to enter that electric territory with my next guest. Todd Colby is a multidisciplinary artist whose work blurs the line between poetry, painting, collage, and performance. He is the author of 7 books of poetry, including his latest, Brilliant Juice. His visual work has been featured at the Met Cloisters, Pulp Gallery, White Columns, and Hammond Museum, just to name a few. As a performer, he has brought his wildly kinetic reading style, a blend of humor, tenderness, and deliberate mischief, to spaces like MoMA, PS1, Dia Art Foundation, the Poetry Project, the Public Theater, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. Back in the 90s, Todd was the frontman of the experimental post-punk band Drunken Boat, where he designed flyers, album art, and wheat-pasted street posters across New York's Lower East Side, an influence that still pulses through his current collage and postcard interventions. A self-described architect, vandal, trickster, and color addict, Todd treats every surface, canvas, postcard, sticker, or wall as a site of possibility, where language and image can be rearranged, rewritten, and reclaimed. Welcome, Todd.
Good to be here, Donnabelle.
Todd, you've said your first real act of mischief happened at the age of 4, slicing an orange with a carving knife like it was a stick of warm butter. Was that your first poetic act?
It was certainly the first time I got stitches. My mother had left the room, and I picked the longest knife that I could find that looked exotic, and I sliced it, and it went right in the inside of my middle finger. And then I was standing there with blood rushing out of my finger, and my mother came in, and it was chaos. But I would say definitely sort of the first, I don't want to say transgressive act, but my certainly going against sort of the grain of what I was supposed to do. And I knew handling a knife at 4 was forbidden, but yeah, in many ways, I think that was like the first foray into transgressive behavior.
Yes. Well, interesting that it was the middle finger that got sliced through. It
Exactly
was
right.
almost like an indelible stitch mark.
Yeah.
sort of highlighting that whole period in your life. So, which came first? Was it art or poetry?
It was really art the most, and it's funny, my dad had videotaped us, or did, Super 8 movies of us when we were little kids. My brother and I are about 17 months apart, and there's some really great archival footage that my dad shot of me at this tiny little desk when I was 4 or 5 years old in Austin, Minnesota, where I was born, and I was sitting at this desk with my back to the camera and kinda turned around and waved and then went right back to work, and both my parents always reminded me that I always wanted a desk, a work surface, someplace to sort of make art and do things. So I would draw incessantly and always befriended people in grade school that knew how to draw race cars or knew how to draw in 3 dimensions. And I thought that they had some sort of magical power or something like that that they could represent in an image with their own hand, something that looked realistic or funny or whatever. So I always kind of was drawn to that. And it wasn't until probably around 12, 13 that I was in the junior high library when we moved to Ottumwa, Iowa at that point at Walsh Junior High, which is no longer there. And I started reading, there's the Poetics of Rock, I think it was called. It was like a couple volume thing, but it would compare like Leonard Cohen lyrics with Dylan Thomas, or it would find some
Ah.
sort of parallel between contemporary songwriters at that point and poetic traditions that they were from. And it spoke to me so much that I started really sort of writing some of my own stuff, but I was super embarrassed about it. I felt very self conscious, and I felt like people that wrote were on a different plane than me. So I would write a bunch of stuff and then hide it up in this drop ceiling that we had in the basement for years. And so whenever I'd want to pull it out, that was my poetry self. I was also an athlete. The way that I fit in as a kid, and we moved around a lot, was to be. I was a good swimmer and a good football player, and so that was the way that I sort of made friends. But that really wasn't the crowd that was really into poetry. So I always had this other group of friends, or a friend, Mark Morris from Ottumwa, Iowa, that we would get together and read our poems to each other, listen to music, and really sort of get to know what it was to be a poet. So I think that
Mm.
my identity for many, many years was strictly as a poet, and I really loved that once I got to college at the University of Iowa. The writers' workshop was there, so I got into the undergraduate workshop, and then I got a special clearance to be in the graduate workshops for a couple summers and had some good teachers. But I'm kind of jumping ahead all over, but I would say really where everything kind of went into super overdrive was I saw Allen Ginsberg was on David Letterman one night in 1982, and my parents were going through a divorce. It was a really sad summer of 82, and then he said he was teaching the Kerouac conference at Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado, and kind of interdisciplinary Buddhist poetics, all this stuff that was really great. And so I guilted both my parents into footing the bill for, it's like a couple $100 or something, but to
Mm.
send me out there. And I got to spend a month out there working with Allen Ginsberg. William Burroughs was there, Anne Waldman, a huge influence, Peter Orlovsky, Robert Creeley. I mean, just all these poets that I was reading and really loved and had full access, poetry tutorials with them, parties with them. And it made me really see how poets live and work. And so that really got me on sort of the fast track to doing that. And I also like that most of those poets that I mentioned were doing music with poetry or
Mm.
performative things, or really thinking about the voice and breath, and all these things were sort of necessary to expressing those words. And I feel like at University of Iowa, at least at that point, there was a kind of thing about the shy, inverted poet that kind of
Mhm.
reads in a way you can barely hear, which is
Mm.
very interesting in some ways. But
Mhm.
I felt like there was this energy because I was also going to punk rock shows and, like, in the basement of these libraries and or bookstores and around
Mhm.
Iowa City, and there was kind of a thriving punk scene and just like crazy, like slam dancing and rolling on the floor. And I kept thinking, like, why can't that same sort of energy be part of poetry in some ways? And
Mm.
so from that, I discovered there's people like Iggy Pop and Patti Smith and whatever that know how to sort of implement these two and can make it alive and feel
Yeah.
like you're a conduit for something.
Mm. Well, and I imagine just going back to the time when you used to hide your poetry in the basement, like that in itself was sort of this way of leaving this covert life, which I found very interesting when you were reflecting this other outwardly life. But then once you came to a place of owning that part of yourself, things just exploded in a way that you
Mm,
probably could never imagine, especially being within the energy and presence of those poets who
mm,
were really making so much headway and change just in the ways we think and the way we are in the world. Now,
mhm.
do you ever start with a poem and then find its visual form, or is it vice versa?
I have a love of captioning things that don't necessarily need a caption. And whether it's a sticker that I put on a light post or a found drawing, I've been working on a series right now. They're Peabody language cards in the 1960s. They would just have a simple thing of a plate of spaghetti or a nurse or a dentist or a car or a truck. And they're just beautifully just depicted, very simple little 8 by 10 cards. And so for years, I've been sort of writing on them and doing different things to them. And so sometimes when I'm looking for a caption, I'll look through some of my writing because I write every day for at
Mm,
least an hour a day, or usually early in the morning. Like this morning,
wow.
I was up at 5 and I wrote for an hour. So it allows me to sort of not only straighten out thoughts and think clearly about what I'm wondering about in the world, but it's also sort of in a way to accumulate a lot of material. So out of that material, I use it. Sometimes it's more for poetry. Other times it's some hybridization of it and use it. I don't really have dividing lines in what this is. Now I'm going to sit down and write the poem. It's
Mm,
funny. Henri Michaud, a really great French poet that I love, had said the mere intention to sit down and write a poem has killed more great poems than it's created. And I feel
mm,
like it's the same thing with art as well for me. I've got a couple grants over the years, whatever, and I'll buy these expensive linen canvases with and stretch really beautifully. And I'm scared of them. But if I go to Michael's and get the 10 pack of the cheapo things, I feel like I can just kind of let it go. So it's always about kind of tricking myself where the stakes are low, where it's just kind of going by the seat of my pants and I'm not really thinking about anything else but that moment.
mm,
And it takes some trickery to get to that point. And I feel like that's where the good stuff comes out. So not to say that I'm not intentional about it or that I'm not strategic or that I don't have forethought before it. It's just, but it's about sort of getting to that point where you can kind of let it go. It's funny. I feel like the people, so many artists say this about, going to MFA programs, and it's more about the important part of an MFA program, which I dropped out of too, is that it's about kind of shedding and forgetting what you learned. And sure, they're inside of you and you have all sort of ideas and thoughts about it, but really kind of forgetting it all and working from some sort of nerve
mm,
and being close to that nerve. And once you find the nerve, you can elegantly implement some of the things you learned in school, but it really is shedding and
mm.
forgetting, just doing it. Yeah.
Just doing it. I'd love to go back to your time with your band. Just when you were in your band, Drunken Boat, you were designing posters and you were also working with postcards and album covers. And you taught yourself to work what you call fast, cheap, and with impact. And I feel
Mhm.
like what you just said there is like, you've said that collage, let's say, will always feel punk to you.
Mhm.
So, how did this sort of street art urgency shape the way you still make things today? Because there's something about
Mhm.
you're saying get rid of whatever structure you feel like you need to be in and to just create. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, I feel like I feel like if I'm overly planned out something or I just did a project at the Cloisters with Annie B. Parson and Bang on a Campy, Michael Gordon and Paul Lazar. It was just heroes of mine for years. And they invited me to be part of this process with them. And it was initially when they said, you're going to make a big banner, we're going to hang it in front of the Cloisters. Amazing. And then I, drew all painted on the backs of 24 suit jackets that all the dancers wore, and then wrote captions on them. So I was kind of captioning the dancers. But initially I froze. I was just like, oh my God, people are really going to see this. This is a purpose driven thing. And the difference is like when I'm in my studio, I'm not really thinking like I'm going to show this, somebody's going to buy this, somebody wants this, whatever. It's free from that. So it took me a while to sort of get over that, like months, to the point where I could just kind of start working on that project without self-consciousness and editing myself or doing
Mm,
it with the expectation for someone else in some way. And that's where the weird magical kind of thing is. And intentionality sometimes can really dampen
mm,
whatever the result is. So there's just some other, it's so nebulous and so hard to describe, but I think of it as like this Ariadne thread, like a golden
mm.
thread. that I
Mhm.
can somehow not willfully grab onto or be part of, but I just sort of conjure it. And then suddenly I'm on it. And then maybe it'll be 3 minutes out of a whole day. Maybe it'll be 2 hours if I'm really lucky. But just trying to get to that point of intelligent forgetfulness and
Yeah.
focus at the same time. So I feel like it's always, I think that's the magic. But you were asking about the band.
Well,
Yeah.
really, you were talking about how having these beautiful, pristine panels ready to go. And I've
Yeah.
been in that place too, where you're just like, oh my God, the pressure here.
Yeah.
But I loved how you talk about collage being so punk, right? Because
Yeah.
your band was like post punk, and there was something about the act of collage. Could you talk about your process working that way?
Yeah, I feel like it's so much of collage is purely appropriation and
Mm,
taking one thing out of a context and adding another thing from another context, and it's alchemy in that way. I feel like it's very much a alchemical reaction between two opposing sort of images and finding some harmony between the two or clash between the two or discordant kind of thing. But just that combination is, I feel like so much of it's definitely punk rock because it's about not so maybe appropriation sometimes, but about going counter to whatever the mainstream sort of ideals are in some way. And so I just feel like that rebellious part of it is, I don't know, it's baked into collage in some way. And I feel
mm,
like starting with Dada artists that were doing it counter to whatever the
mm,
prevailing system was. It's
mm,
certainly less revolutionary now. And now a lot of poets make collages from Alice Notley to whoever we're always making them. It's liberating in some way. And it allows me to not just appropriate, but to nudge and poke a little bit with
mm,
it.
mhm.
And I find that pleasurable.
You've mentioned several times already that words and images don't just coexist in your work. They simply speak to each other. And I
Mhm.
love the project that has been going viral lately just because it's so resonant for so many people. And it's that sticker project where you started in New York City and basically they function like poems on these stickers that you usually find with the red outline around it and it's peel off. And they're poems left for strangers and they're unsigned, they're anonymous, like little transmissions, and you just leave them in all these random places and even here locally in
Mhm.
Northampton. Are these forms of guerrilla tenderness?
I like that. Yeah, in a funny way, they started it like in 2015. I had a residency for 6 months out on Governor's Island through Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. So I had a beautiful studio on Governor's Island, and I would spend all day there. And I had like a sort of a box of stuff that I brought out there, and in it was these Avery labels with this. And I started thinking I wanted to make memorials for poets that I loved all around Brooklyn. And so it was like memorial posts for Emily Dickinson, for Arthur Rimbaud, for whoever. And then as people died, I would instantly do a memorial post for Toni Morrison or whoever was Robert
Mhm.
Frank, all these different people. And then I started thinking of as a constraint. I had to get something that could basically fit maybe 7 words, 8 words maximum. And how can you make something, number one, that's like this small, really tiny, 3 by 5, and then hang it on something that's also competing with a lot of other things that are hung on it and still make some sort of impact or have someone notice it and make it sort of like someone to walk by it and maybe it's still stick in their head or something. And much to my surprise, it was instantly people would take pictures of it and post it on Instagram. Who is this? When I first was in Northampton, blanking on her name from the Boston Globe, found them on the bike path and then did a piece about finding these stickers that were cryptic and but timely and whatnot. Yes, I feel like that constraint is great, but I'm always amazed when I hang something up and someone finds them or reposts them or recognizes them because they feel so small and so tiny. And I'm just really grateful that people find them impactful, people find them memorable, people want to collect them.
Mhm.
I did that giant version of one in front of the Cloisters, which is the weirdest like transition from that to this huge. It's hanging in my studio now. It's just like sort of amazing to see that. So yeah, I feel like I just like the sort of the tiny space. The stakes are really low. Those stickers are really cheap. I can write something. If I make a mistake, I can throw it away. If I really like something, I'll write a bunch of them and put them all over on a walk. Or it's about positioning too, I think is critical. So it's like where you do it. You don't want to be it too obvious, like on a window of a store or something, but just something sort of low on a post, whatever. So that's also part of my process is like, where do I put it?
So which ones have you found have been the most shared?
What was the one that was really shared? I did one. Thanks for reading Emily Dickinson to me over the intercom at Price Chopper was one. So there was a whole series where I was really getting into doing thanks or thanks
Mm.
again for not being a big jerk or thanks
Mhm.
again for these kind of things. I feel like those were a lot of people respond to those. The one I've been doing lately that people respond to is exuberance is still necessary.
Oh,
Um,
I love that
and
one.
yeah,
Yes.
so it's just like, and I just love that people want those and want to have them.
Mm.
I hand them out whenever I do readings. When I had that opening at the Hammond Museum, I just handed them to people and people wanted them. Hey, my daughter wants one. Can you give me another one? That kind of thing. So it's like I love that sort of excitement and making these things that they really are pennies a piece or whatever, but
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
really put them in scrapbooks or hang them on the
Yeah.
refrigerator or wear them around or yeah.
I
So
mean,
I yeah. Yeah.
you've obviously plucked a nerve. You've plucked a particular nerve that resonates with a lot of people, and I'm curious because these are unsigned, and I love that. So, like, who did this? Like, you
Mhm,
call attention to this little tiny label on a telephone pole or in
mhm.
just some random place. And even though you are putting these messages out, what is it about you being anonymous, like secretly just leaving these messages here that
Oh,
appeals
it's
to you?
so subversive, and it feels like a sacrifice in some ways
Mm,
because my name isn't attached to it, and it just like putting it out there, and if somebody wants to appropriate it or claim it as their own or post it without any sort of credits or whatever, which frequently happens, and then people say, "Oh, that's Todd," or whatever. But there's just something about it's cleansing just to throw it out there and not
mm,
worry about authorship so much, which is so much about being a poet, so much about being an artist or a studio artist or whatever, and just having it out there. That anonymity is liberating, and I can
mm,
kind of write whatever I want. Now people kind of know or associate it with me in some way, so I'm a little bit conscious of it. So I've started
mm.
doing some more cardboard ones that are about this big,
Just to mix it
and
up a little bit.
exactly, and usually like an orange stripe with a star on it or just green. And I've been really into this phrase called "his sour moods certainly, comma, certainly." And I've
Mm,
just started hanging a lot of those up in New York City, around Northampton, some other places. So it's just kind of a way to sort of step out of that. It's
mm,
also harder to hang up stickers around Northampton because the telephone poles are wood and those stickers don't stick to those. So it's a little trickier finding the places where you can put them. I've managed to
mm.
find those places, but somehow just bringing a staple gun, I have it in the back of the car, and I just kind of at a stop sign or whatever. You'll see some if you look
Is this during the day or at night when no one can see you?
anytime, anytime.
Anytime when you're
Yeah,
walking the dog, maybe?
I've
Yeah.
done that. Put it in a
Yeah.
satchel and
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. So, Todd, how do you choose what makes it onto the label or the sticker?
Some phrase will come into my head when I'm doing something else, not consciously trying to make a sticker. And it'll just kind of keep going through my head enough that I'll think, okay, I need to write this down. And usually I put it into my notebook initially, look at it for a while, and then I'll put it on a sticker and see how the line breaks and I put way too much thought into how the lines break in it and
Hmm.
where the words are. It's the poet in me. So I kind of test it out on myself a little bit. And on my studio door, I'll put it on my door for a couple days just to sort of see it, whether people say anything about it or not. Just
Mm.
putting it out there in a slightly public way. And then, yeah, so that process. And then finally, I'll get to the point where I really like this phrase. This is an amazing phrase. And I'm going to do 30 of the same one and just see what happens with it. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
I mean, well, I was curious about what role the community plays in your practice. Like most people think that, I'm in the studio and the art is just for me. And it's for
Mhm.
me in a way that only I can transform myself. But it seems like the community and being out in the public is very much a part of your practice as well.
Although, I'm somebody who likes to be alone a lot during the day. I feel like whenever I have to socialize a lot, 2 nights in a row, dinner with friends or something, I feel like I've run a marathon and it's exhausting. So I do kind of sequester a lot. So it's kind of my way of making an extension of being part of the community in the community or a hello kind of thing. A name tag is a hello. And it just makes me feel like I'm part of something. And I don't necessarily address issues that are happening in wherever I happen to be, Brooklyn, Northampton, whatever. But it's more about just things that internally that I feel like might be on the pulse of what's happening, but not a direct reference or topical in a way that's too direct. And communicate. I'm a writer who has like an ideal reader, whether it's a real person or not. When I'm writing something, I think that reader in my head, that imaginary thing, gets it and understands it and isn't critical, isn't negating anything, but is actually sort of standing in front of me with a big smile and
Mm.
saying, yes, go, yes, kind of thing. And I need to have that. It's weird. I've never really articulated that before, but I feel like there is like this yes person that's in my head. And it's the same thing when I make those labels. I feel like there's a person that's saying, yes, yes, that's great. Do it. Yes.
I'd love to go to your two most recent books. Of course, Brilliant Juice, which I
Mhm.
love that title, and It's Okay to See Ghosts Now. Now, they're definitely like invitations, or maybe they're more declarations. When
Mhm.
you title your books, I mean, because you're encapsulating the whole flavor, how do you choose? And specifically the one about ghosts, because in my world, there's a particular meaning for that, but I would love to hear what
Mhm.
you're speaking about in that particular book.
The book itself, It's Okay to See Ghosts Now, came out of a collaboration. Marianne Vitali, who's a dear friend of mine, and we've done shows together, both art shows and performance art. And we were in a group with Michael Portnoy, the three of us, called Yogurt Boys, we performed a lot as a group. And I feel like the text of that book was, I don't feel like it, I know it was a performance that we did at one of Marianne's openings. She had a couple of her friends, me and Dean, a couple other people. And that was some of the text that I wrote for the performance itself. And then when it came time to do a book, Spiral Editions had asked me to do a chapbook with them, who published that book. And then I started using it. As far as the title itself, it was around the peak of the pandemic. And so many, I got obsessed with writing down the fatalities and the
Hmm.
amount of cases of COVID. There was an app that you could get, and I was just obsessed with it and so morbid. Somehow I felt like it needed to be memorialized in some way. And I knew someday I would look back on it and see this. I'm like, oh my God, what a weird time. And I thought, with so many people dying, my dad died in 2022, not from COVID, other things. I felt like death was creeping in. And I felt like it's okay to see their ghosts. It's okay to sort of be aware of that. And it felt also kind of funny and irreverent in some way as well. Of like, somebody gives you permission, like, it's okay to see ghosts now. You're not crazy if you see ghosts, or whatever, some other thing that was going on with it. But yeah, that's where it came from. Just kind of the mortality that was happening, and trying
Mm,
to not circumnavigate it, but just jump right into it and say, yeah, it's okay to see ghosts now. This is a time of a lot of dying. So there's a lot more ghosts and you can see them. Yeah.
mm. I mean, it's kind of a refreshing way of looking at death for someone who works with a lot of people who are in grief when they have their loved ones pass.
Yes.
It's almost like an acknowledgement. You're like, they're just hanging out, so you might as well say hello because they're with you all the
Yeah.
time. But anyway, so I know you've done these other projects where you take postcards and you alter them in a way, obviously with those other cards you were mentioning earlier. When you're creating these, is it the act in altering them? Are you also feeling like you're working and collaborating with time in a way?
Yeah, because a lot of those postcards have messages on the backs of them, the part where you write, and it's from like 1901, and somebody
Mm,
writing to their boyfriend in New York and saying, wow, Maine is so beautiful, and written in that kind of old fashioned script and whatnot. And so I feel like that, whatever that letter, the message that was sent to someone over a century ago, and the image that was seen as a representation of having visited that place, becomes in the background in some way, and it becomes the support for what I want to do then. And so then I bring my own point of view into it. And through a century, I feel like I'm adding my voice in some way and
mhm,
altering it or narrating it or captioning it, which is a frequent word that I like to use, because I feel like a lot of the writing stuff and the hanging, the slaps, the stickers up, the posters, whatever, it's about having an ability to sort of caption the world. The dancers at the cloisters, all of it is just like
mm,
captioning things and putting a word and I hate the word meme. I don't want to use that word, but I feel like it's more about captioning the world in
Mm,
real time, not digitally, but just like
mhm,
on things and putting names and phrases. And so with
mm,
postcards, again, those started mostly with finding postcards of Governor's Island when I first started doing it, and then writing, imagining there were all these memorials to different poets out on Governor's Island. So there was a Baudelaire memorial fountain, there was an Emily Dickinson memorial gazebo, and things like that. Whatever was in it, I would just imagine that's what it was and then write on it. But yeah, I feel like it's collaborative in the way that it's kind of mystical,
mhm,
but because of the message on it and the time that's passed and the fact that that's been received by someone and the message was received by sent and received by two people I'll never know, see their faces or anything, and then I'm
mhm,
kind of in there messing with things. It makes me also think when I send postcards to people, which I still like to do, that someday someone will find that one, and what will their addition to it be in 100 years, assuming there's a
mm.
world in 100 years, I hope so. And so that kind of
Right.
like, and I'm putting my own stuff into the pile that maybe some
Mm.
artist who hasn't even been born yet will go in and alter in some way.
You described yourself as a trickster in
Mhm.
ways when you're doing your work. What compels you to intervene on reality?
Both my parents had, or my mom's still alive, but just have a kind of irreverent, almost chip on their shoulder kind of humor about things. The way to communicate with them and be in the family was just, I was the older brother, so I was always kind of performing for my brother as well. But just how you could use your wit to attain status in the family. If I could make my mom or dad laugh, I felt loved in some way. And so there was
Oh.
always sort of like, and the more left of center, the more irreverent that I was or whatnot, the bigger reaction it got. So maybe some of that sort of impulse, it comes from wanting to sort of impress my parents in some way, or like, or amuse them, because there was a lot,
Mm,
there were a lot of tragic things in my family. There's a lot of just
yeah.
stuff that wasn't so great. And so the
Mm,
way to cut through all of it was just to make gallows humor kind of thing or
mm,
make light of it. And I think that's more or less what it was.
mm. You've read your poetry in some incredible spaces, from intimate rooms and major museums like MoMA PS1. How does the performance or breathing words into space, as you mentioned earlier, change a poem compared to seeing it on a page or stuck to a telephone pole?
It's funny. I always feel like that a lot of people have said to me, and I take it as the highest compliment. Like once they hear me read, they hear my voice when they read the poem. And not that they didn't like the poetry before, but they hear the stresses and the breath and whatnot. And so when I'm writing a poem, I read it a million times into my phone and I listen to the cadences, I listen to the breath, I listen to the music of it almost abstractly as though it's music in some way. Not that I'm a rhyming poet and whatnot, but there's a rhythm and there's a beat that goes on to it. And then I also have my partner Tara. I'll have her read it to me. And so if she stumbles on it or it doesn't come through when she's reading it, it's not her fault. It's because the poem is written in a way that she can't just flow with it. And so I get it to the point where I can make it flow. And I feel like that is when it really elevates and it feels like, I don't know, that golden thread that I mentioned, that feeling of just elation and breath, which is so much part of meditation, exercise, whatever. And once I'm tapped into that, I'm not nervous anymore. I'm not self conscious. I'm in service to the language, and my body is an instrument. And it is kind of like being in this elevated kind of state of mind that I long for. And it really get off on those kind of like in this kind of
Mm,
mental, spiritual way. Not like I'm speaking in tongues or something, but just that
mm,
rhythm. And it's the closest thing I've got. I mean, my God, being in a band and singing for a band and having the music behind you, like supporting you, literally, like feeling like it
mm,
lifts you. Everything is geared towards this thing happening. And I would say those are probably the most ecstatic, otherworldly moments that I've had in my entire life on stages with a band. And so I feel like there's a part of me that always kind of wants to long for that feeling of
mm,
beyond ecstasy. It's just a feeling of just dissolving and being part of everything. And so I feel like that I want that to happen in readings and I try to
mm.
get to that place whenever I read. So even if
Well,
I'm reading
you
alone, so
well, there's something I believe that whenever anyone does a creative act, be it writing, be it music, playing an instrument, or painting, there's an element of essentially channeling whatever that inspiration is from you as the vessel out into whatever medium is taking place and
Mhm,
being held at that moment. And you just what you described there is very much about being that conduit
mhm.
of whatever you want to call it, divine energy. And I imagine too that you emanate this kind of electricity and energy while you are reading or performing in front of an audience. Could you share a moment from a reading or performance where you felt completely connected, not just to the words, but to the audience in a different way?
On New Year's Day, the New Year's Day readings at the Poetry Project at St. Mark's Church, where I've been involved with that place, taking free workshops years ago in the '80s to teach me teaching workshops, and then also being on the board of directors for 10 years. So the place just has an amazing sort of position inside of my artistic self. And to say nothing of all the great poets from Patti Smith to whatever have started their careers there. So on New Year's Day, there's probably, I don't know, well over 500 people in a packed sanctuary. And you get up and people applaud. And then I'm nervous as hell. And I can't get my breath, and my breath is all up here, and I can't get it in the belly. And then I'll just expel like two words. And this is happening multiple times there, but I associate it more being in that space because there's a lot of energy from my poetic ancestors that are in there, and I'm open to that as well. And I feel like those are the moments where time doesn't really exist. I don't really know like how people are reacting even. I'm
Mm,
not aware if there's people are laughing or applauding or whatever. And I also, it feels like it just like a minute went by, but it's like 5 minutes or whatever. And so I just love those performances, just where the stakes feel very high and I'm ready to do it and make it happen. Yeah.
mm,
So I think at the Poetry Project, I feel like those where I've had the most incredible kind of experiences. And it takes
mm.
me a long time to calm down afterwards. And
Ugh. Yeah, no, I mean, just you describing it, I can almost imagine that space as being so electric.
yeah,
And, you're just in the flow.
yeah,
And when you're like, no space or time, I am just here
yeah,
doing and being. How beautiful that
yeah.
is. Do you consider yourself an optimist?
Uh, it depends. I mean, one of the things that bothers Tara that I'll say all the time, it's like I'll say, it doesn't matter. We're all going to die someday anyway." And she's like, "Why do you say?" She's a psychologist, by the way, so it's like
Okay.
we're like, "That's kind of ideation that that kind of thing." Not she isn't like that, but nonetheless. But I would say on a higher level, the higher part of Todd Colby is definitely feels the energy that I have inside is definitely a positive thing. As much as I try to be dark and as much as I maybe daydream and fantasize about just how horrible things are, there's also a part of me that it's a will. I don't know what it is, but it drives me through the world and it
Mm,
keeps me paying attention. It keeps me notating what's happening around me, watching other people, listening to things, looking at my dog, just like ways
mm,
of just being in the world, which aren't like grandiose, but it's just the dailiness of paying attention. And I
mhm,
feel like that kind of necessitates a certain amount of, or betrays or shows a certain amount of optimism to be
mm.
present. Because
Yeah,
when you're really in despair, it's hard to be present. You just want to be inverted and whatnot. And I feel like,
yeah.
yes, I'm much more noticing things.
Mm,
And so many poets from the New York school, it's all about this dailiness, it's a way
mhm,
of sort of a poetic practice, an artistic practice of just paying attention to the world. And it's just amazing how much unfolds and how much there is to be interested in, how contrasting it is to everything that's happening in the world and a little bit of a relief from it. Not an
mm,
escape, but a celebration of the same world that all the bad things are happening in too
mhm,
is also
mhm.
a way of paying attention and seeing sort of the remarkable structure and beauty and completeness of it all. So,
Would
yeah.
that be called hope or blind faith, you think?
Yeah, I mean, hope. Without hope, and it's so hard to have hope right now. But
Mm,
without it, it feels so vast and empty and sad. Friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, Jim Cohen, big, large, and far. He had a film that he showed at Amherst Theater, and it's about astronomers and astrophysicists. It's a fictional film, but it was really beautiful. And our neighbor here, James Lowenthal, who's a professor at Smith at astronomy, and all these astronomy people were in the room. And it was really about sort of not just the chaos of the world, but looking up at the sky and the patterns and how vast and beautiful it is. And at one point, Jem's 9-year-old son is describing how the moon works with tides. And it's just through a 9-year-old mind, but it's so beautifully just described. And the way that these astrophysicists and astronomers talk about what's up there and dark skies and how you can feel connected to this really vast thing that we're all part of.
Mm.
I feel like whenever I'm reminded of those sort of things, I feel giddy and excited. And I don't know, just fortunate that we have that perspective, that we have the
Mm.
science to see those things, to see how far it is. And there's people that
Mm.
spend their whole lives trying to see further or find connections between things. And that's the most incredible thing in the world, you know?
Well, it's almost like a remembrance too,
Yeah.
that there's something just so much bigger than
Yeah.
whatever is happening right here, right
And
now.
what we're seeing in the sky is a remembrance because it's already in the
It's
past, like
already been there. Yeah.
millions of years ago. So it's like,
I
you know.
know. Well, what do you hope people carry with them after encountering one of your poems or pieces
Mm.
of art?
The feeling that I get sometimes when I'm rereading Alice Notley, who's a hero and great poet who died this past spring. I've been rereading some of her work, and there's a book called Certain Magical Acts. And I feel like whenever I read that book lately, I feel not only her presence, but I feel a deeper connection to the world and
Mm.
the complexity and the joy and a lot of things that we don't always pay attention to as much. So I think I
Mm.
just want people to feel the complexity and the joy and feel the connection to other people and the world and how many ways there are to sort of illustrate that. And maybe
Mm.
they'd want to participate in that as well. Everybody has a story and a point of view and a way of seeing and being. And if you can kind of help push somebody by bravely going to the front lines and doing that, come on, we
Mm.
can all, the water's great.
That's right.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Where can folks find out what you're up to?
Most of the time on Instagram, it's just at Todd J. Colby. I have a old blog spot called Glee Farm, but
Mm.
it's not really that active, but there's a lot of archival stuff from 2005 going way back. But yeah, most of the time Instagram, I feel like that's the place that I let people know what's happening.
Well, Todd Colby, your work reminds us that art and poetry are not just separate practices, but living, breathing ways of moving through the world. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your humor, of course, and your heart with us today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for being here. I hope something from today's conversation stayed with you or gave you a new way to look at things. That awareness, that pause, that's where things start to shift. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might need it. You can learn more about my work and what's coming up at sonorouslight.com, and you can follow me on Instagram at @tohumishuman. Until next time, keep humming.